against their best interests, who continually keep putting people in because it's party politics. We're always going to be fighting this battle, and that's why I say it has to be a continual fight. We cannot let
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabby.com. Gabby. More info at Gabby.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
For our book club today, we're reading Out of the Wreckage, A New Politics for an Age of Crisis by George Monbiot. This is from Chapter 3, Don't Look Back. The political history of the second half of the 20th century could be summarized as the conflict between its two great narratives, neoliberalism and social democracy. Social democracy in this era, whose story I briefly summarized in Chapter 1, acquired much of its power and coherence from the thinking of one remarkable man. Across 4 decades, John Maynard Keynes's work dominated economic thought and practice. During the period the French called the Trente Glorieuses, 1945 to 1975, his prescriptions are widely credited with reviving economies and distributing their benefits. That they remain more or less the only mainstream alternative to neoliberalism today reveals a remarkable stagnation of both thought and ambition. The first and most obvious problem with an attempt to use Keynesian social democracy as a core political narrative is that the story is more than 80 years old. Political stories need to be renewed. If politics does not feel fresh, it struggles to kindle the imaginative excitement from which hope arises. The second problem is that the surviving enthusiasm for Keynes among mainstream parties is highly selective. It has been reduced in most cases to lowering interest rates when economies are sluggish and engaging in tepid counter-cyclical public spending, which means injecting public money into the economy when unemployment is high or recession threatens. Other Keynesian measures, such as raising taxes when an economy grows quickly to dampen the boom-bust cycle, the fixed exchange rate system, capital controls, and a self-balancing global banking system, an international clearing union, all of which Keynes saw as essential complements to these policies, have been discarded and forgotten. Not only does this ensure that the rich old story has been reduced to 2 thin chapters, whose loss of context destroys their narrative power, but the absence of other Keynesian measures, as well as changed global circumstances, weakens the effectiveness of the remaining elements of policy. Let me give you an example. In 2009, in the hope of boosting the economy in the wake of the financial crash, the British government spent £300 million on stimulating sales of new cars. Under its scrappage scheme, if car owners traded in their old vehicles for new ones, the government, with the help of manufacturers, knocked £2,000 off the price. This lavish program was partly justified as an environmental measure, though it was clear from the outset that it would lead to a rise in environmental impacts as the materials and energies used in manufacturing new cars outweigh any likely savings from better fuel economy. Its primary purpose was to boost British car assembly plants and protect the jobs of their workers. But European state aid rules forbade such schemes from discriminating between cars made in Britain and cars made abroad. British car parts assembled only some 15% of the vehicles sold in that country, which meant that 85% of the benefit went to car plants in Germany, Japan, and other manufacturing nations. We could see this spending as foreign aid to some of the world's richest nations. The current pattern of globalization, which developed partly as a result of abandoning the fixed exchange rates and capital controls that Keynes advocated, ensures that this problem is to some extent repeated wherever Keynesian stimulus spending is applied. It might lead to a general, if scarcely detectable, global economic uplift, but the domestic impact will necessarily be weaker than Keynes intended. This issue is compounded by the phenomena of job-free growth, caused in part by the automation now spreading into almost every economic sector. Today, governments pull the starter cord, spending public money and cutting interest rates, that ignited the economy and employment in the past, only to discover that it snaps before the motor fires. Two feeble measures, removed from the rich framework of thought and narrative in which they were once embedded, have little chance of sustaining a political revival. Another issue is that the troubles that beset the Keynesian model in the 1970s have not disappeared. While the oil embargo of '73 was the immediate trigger for the lethal combination of high inflation and high unemployment, called stagflation back then, that Keynesian policies were almost powerless to counteract. Problems with the system had been mounting for years. Falling productivity and rising costs push inflation, wages and prices pursuing each other upwards, were already beginning to erode support for Keynesian economics. Most importantly, perhaps, the program had buckled in response to the political demands of capital. Strong financial regulations and controls on the movement of money began to weaken in the 1950s as governments started to liberalize financial markets. Richard Nixon's decision in '71 to suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold destroyed the system of fixed exchange rates on which much of the success of Keynes's policies depended. The capital controls introduced to prevent financiers and speculators from sucking money out of balanced Keynesian economies collapsed. Today, it's hard to find a mainstream politician in Europe or the Anglophone nations, including those who call themselves Keynesians, prepared to call for their reintroduction. We cannot hope that the strategies deployed by global finance that helped to destroy the efficacy of Keynes's measures in the '70s will be unlearned. If the soft Keynesianism proposed by opponents of neoliberalism is to amount to anything but tinkering, it has to confront a wider set of challenges than most of its advocates have yet been prepared to acknowledge. But perhaps the biggest problem residual Keynesianism confronts in the 21st century is that when it does work, it collides headfirst with the environmental crisis. The book, Out of the Wreckage by George Monbiot.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Friday the 13th. Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. TGIF. It's a beautiful Friday here in Oregon. Well, sorry, it was kind of wild weather earlier, but it's gotten much better. Trita Parsi is going to be with us in the second hour talking about the threat of war with Iran and Donald Trump's erratic foreign policy and you know, many of our concerns about the next 2 months. And the rest of the day, Anything Goes Friday. We'll be taking your calls. But our first hour, Congressman Ro Khanna is with us. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California, the Silicon Valley area in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.com, .house.gov. And his Twitter handle is Rep Ro Khanna. And he will be with us for the hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. Congressman Khanna, welcome back. Great to have you with us. I'm wondering what's at the top of your mind today.
Well, Tom, great to be with you. And Trita Parsi is terrific. We've worked with him extensively on foreign policy issues, so your guests are in for a treat with him. You know, I was just reading today the article about how the Republicans are threatening to block either Warren or Sanders from an administration. And I really think we have to speak out and make sure that we push to have high-profile progressives in the cabinet. It would be a disaster if we allow McConnell veto over any high-profile progressive as this cabinet takes place, because then it's forget getting a progressive agenda. You won't even get what Biden has committed to the task forces. So a lot of progressives are thinking about how do we make sure there is progressive representation in this administration.
How do we do that?
Well, I think we have to make two things clear. First, I think we have to make it clear that we have to take a fight to McConnell, that we can't compromise and accommodate before McConnell is forced to vote. And so I would say with Sanders, take it to a vote. With Warren, take it to a vote. Force these people on the record to be breaking on all norms and rejecting qualified individuals and their colleagues. And same thing with our policies. Force McConnell to vote down a $15 minimum wage. Force him to vote down expansion of Medicare. Force him to vote down policies of higher infrastructure. And then what would be a mistake is to try to negotiate behind closed doors with McConnell and just take up things for votes which McConnell agrees to. I think we have to be bold and really present McConnell as the obstacle with the bully pulpit of the White House and the House leadership.
You know, almost every day of the last 8 or 9 months of the Obama administration, I was hoping, wishing, waiting for President Obama to come out and just absolutely daily scorch Mitch McConnell for not even holding a hearing. Senator's not even talking to Merrick Garland, his nominee for the Supreme Court. He didn't do that, though. I mean, you know, he just kind of let it happen. There were some protestations. I mean, I shouldn't, you know, make it sound like he was totally passive, but it didn't work. I mean, how do you force Mitch McConnell, unless Joe Biden is willing to go to the mat? I can get it. If he was willing every day to hold a daily press conference and trash Mitch McConnell, the pressure might build to the point where he would crack. I think it would have had Obama done that. But, you know, how do you force him to have a vote? Or am I missing something here?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think we need to have a daily press conference by President Biden and our House leadership, and we've got to take the fight to McConnell. You know, the Republicans are experts at villainizing people, and Democrats, we don't like to point out that there are actually villains in the story, that there are forces and people who are standing in the way of the progress of millions of Americans. And I just think if we do not take the fight to McConnell on principled issues, then you're going to get an incrementalist policy. So people often ask me, they say, well, Ro, the Senate, it may be in Republican hands, and obviously we've got to fight for Georgia, but if we don't win the 2 seats and we only win 1, what can you expect? I think there's a big difference between a administration and a Congress that fights with everything we have for progressive principles and build support, and then if McConnell continues to resist, we've given it everything we had. That's, I think, very different than a concession and accommodation before we even wage the fight.
Yeah, amen. Well, let's pick up some phone calls. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Jeremiah in Coalport, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. My question is about redistricting. Number one, in order to be able to redraw the maps, do we have to flip the gerrymandered districts in state houses? And number two, we know Republicans are going to be gerrymandering egregiously the states that they control. So should we not gerrymander the states that we control to balance out the gerrymandering that they're going to do?
Well, Jeremiah, very good questions. I mean, we don't have to flip the specific gerrymandered district, but we do need a majority in the state legislature. And unfortunately, we didn't get those majorities in the 2020 elections. And then in places where we have an advantage, like California, there is no gerrymandering. So I, for example, or state legislatures have absolutely no say in how those seats are drawn. It's an independent commission. Now, it turns out that the last time the independent commission drew the maps in states like California, it turned out to be very good for Democrats because competitive districts tend to be good for Democrats. And usually it's the highly partisan ones that are not. But it's a challenge for us. I mean, look, we're going to have a real fight to keep the House in 2 years. It's hard when you have an incumbent president, and it's going to be hard with the gerrymandering that the Republicans are going to do, given they're still controlling a lot of the state legislatures.
Cliff in Santa Clarita, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, distinguished gentlemen. Representative Khanna, okay, Trump throws something out ahead of time, like the elections are going to be rigged. Okay, he throws it out ahead of time. Thom just informed us recently that the Trump tax cuts are going to turn into tax increases for everyone that makes less than $70,000. I think that it's essential that we get that message out to the American people ahead of time, because if the tax increases go into people under 70,000, 100% the right is going to blame Biden for it. So we need to get out ahead of them and let them know that the tax increases that they're going to experience are from Trump's tax cuts. What say you?
Cliff, that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point, that the tax cuts for the middle class, working class expired under the Trump tax cuts. That's going to be a tax hike. Frankly, we should have probably made that point in the debate leading up to the election. But certainly we should be looking at where tax increases are going to take place for working class and middle class families and get ahead of that. So I appreciate your raising that. I hadn't thought about that, and it's something I'll take back to my colleagues.
George in Portland, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, gentlemen. I wanted to talk about the coup that's happening in real time here. We've all, for 4 years we've been saying, "Oh, he'll never get away with that," or whatever it is that Donald Trump is trying. And from the mind of a simpleton who doesn't really know the system and who certainly doesn't care about the system, it seems like he's got a coup planned, and Democrats are riding right along with it. How are we going to deal with that?
Well, I would say we're opposing any effort for him to even go down that path. I mean, I was pleased to see that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said that his allegiance is to the Constitution. And I think after December 8th, once we have the certification, there's going to be a lot more certainty.
Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program, our national town hall meeting. And we will be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. It's 15 minutes past the hour. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. He's vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. And welcome back. Joe in Cupertino, California. You are on the air with your congressman.
Well, I wanted to congratulate Congressman Khanna for a spectacular win in his district again. I haven't seen all the numbers yet, but I know it was a trouncing. I had a question about the spread of COVID-19, and I heard Elon Musk apparently is tested positive and a negative, and he's using the reagent. And the governor sealed the border, saying if you're traveling back to California, you're supposed to self-quarantine for 14 days. I was asking I wondered if maybe we could do something to prevent the rate of spread by trying to restrict some of the travel. I know it's tough, but it's getting worse. But we just wanted to throw out real quick before I let you go. Thom had a guest on yesterday, and he said that Ralph Nader had a plan to try to take back the Senate. I thought it was wonderful. I wondered if Thom could explore this with the Democratic governor and the Republican senator, the Democratic governors in North Carolina and in Pennsylvania, and the 2 Republican senators, that we can afford not to lose any senators on our side to take back, and post that before they decide, so Mitch has no say. But once again, I'm trying to find if we can stop the rate of COVID-19.
It was very, very briefly that Biden should put Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania and Richard Burr of North Carolina in his cabinet in relatively, non-destructive positions, and that would right. Both those states have Democratic governors.
Yeah, okay, no, so I mean, Joe, I think that
go ahead, Congressman.
Joe, I think your point about what we can do, there's some very simple things. I know it's the mask wearing has gotten old, but the studies by the University of California, San Francisco had 2 very interesting points. One, which most people know, that if you wear a mask, your chances of getting COVID are far lower. The second thing, which I didn't know, is that they found that if you wear a mask, you get such a low level of inoculum, even if you do get COVID, that the vast majority of people who got COVID while wearing masks were asymptomatic. So I think just having a tone set by the new president about why wearing masks, forget the common good, why it's in people's self-interest, could make a difference. The second thing is these contact tracing apps that we have, which protect privacy but actually would allow contact tracing. It's ironic that Apple and Google have come out with them, and they're being implemented in Germany and Ireland and in Japan and Korea, and no implementation here. And so we need a national plan for contact tracing. I think those two things would do a lot in helping us get the infection and pandemic under control.
And what are your thoughts on President Biden appointing a couple of Republicans to his cabinet to decrease the level of them in the Senate?
Well, I think it depends on who it is, and it's not a bad idea if maybe we could put them in some role that is not consequential. But if it would really give us a Senate majority, I mean, that's the type of thing that the Republicans would do. So, I mean, having a Republican Senate majority is such an important thing that I would look at that if it could work. I'd imagine there'd be a lot of pressure on the Republican not to leave their seat.
Yeah, I think it was Bill Clinton who put William Cohen in his cabinet, but it wasn't to flip the Senate. I think it was just he thought he was a good guy, but, you know, he was a Republican. Anyhow, we'll be right back with more of Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls in our hour-long national town hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. You can check out his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep as in representative, Rep Ro, R-O, Khanna, KHANNA. We'll be right back. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast, 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Did you know that there have been 8 federal judges who have been convicted and removed from the federal bench? 15 altogether have been impeached. 8 have been removed from office since the beginning. 3 of them since 1988, including one judge, Thomas Porteous down in Louisiana, who was impeached and removed from office for signing false financial declarations under penalty of perjury, which it turns out it looks like Clarence Thomas did for quite a number of years when he did not disclose, as he is required by law to do, that his wife was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Heritage Foundation. That and his perjury around Anita Hill and others, there were numerous witnesses that didn't even get called, could legitimately spark an impeachment of Clarence Thomas. We got a video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. Check it out. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Dan in Charlotte, North Carolina, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey there, guys. How you doing?
Good.
Hi, Dan.
What's up?
Hey, so I got a quick question for you. I'd like to get an opinion. So when Trump managed to get a lot of his department head picks past Congress by making them actings, is that something you would think that would if McConnell is fighting Biden on this, that the Biden should just turn around and do it back to him?
And I think it's a reasonable thing to explore, and I don't know the details of the law of how long you can serve in an acting role. It does diminish your effectiveness as a cabinet secretary in terms of the influence you have on both the civilians who are serving in the department and the seriousness by which you're taken on the Hill. So there is some loss in doing it. But if there's no other option, certainly I think that avenue has to be explored.
Margaret in Enumclaw, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman and Tom. I appreciate your taking my call. I'm curious about something. There's so many fires to put out. It's worse than just a national forest fire. But I wonder, is there any way at all that this the finalization, the Electoral College can in any way, shape, or form screw this up at the last minute? We're all worried about what's going on right now and the people that are blocking everything. But the big coup is coming, and I don't totally understand it for some reason or another. I haven't got it completely through my brain. Help me. Tell me this can't possibly happen at the last second, that the Electoral College can give this mess to Trump.
Margaret, I think you can be very confident it won't happen. I mean, the states all have laws that bind the state legislature to give their Electoral College votes to the person who is certified and has the certification. Now, technically, the state legislatures could convene and choose to disregard that law. And it would go up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court could rule that the state legislatures have the constitutional power to disregard their state laws. I have not seen any indication from the state leaders that they are willing to take such an extreme measure. And I think it would probably cost the Republicans the state houses in places if they were to do that. If this were down to one state, I would be much more concerned. But the fact that you would need 3 states to do that seems very, very unlikely. And so I think it's something that we should be vigilant about, but not overly concerned about. I don't know, Tom, if you have thoughts on it.
I share your opinion. I do think, though, that Democrats need to start screaming about the Electoral College. Al Gore won the national vote by 500,000 votes. Hillary Clinton won it by 3 million votes. The National Popular Vote.com compact is like really vital, and I realize we're not going to get a constitutional amendment through, but we need to start yelling about this, making it a huge issue, in my opinion. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the fact that people are thinking this is a close election, I mean, Joe Biden, at the end of the day, when all the votes are counted, he may have a bigger win on the popular vote than Barack Obama did in 2012. And so this is not some close election in terms of the millions of difference that Biden is going to win by. Yeah,
I agree, and I think Democrats need to stop referring, and the media needs to stop referring to it as the popular vote and start calling it the national vote. But anyhow, John in Monroe, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, a pleasure. I was wondering what the chances of getting the HEROES Act back on the table would be, and getting the president-elect on board to use the bully pulpit to help push it. And a particular shout-out to Mark Buchanan, who is my senator. Yay, Mark. And I'm hoping that the progressives can essentially shame the American people shame the Republicans and Mitch McConnell into moving forward. If you can get the American people aware of what's in the HEROES Act and use the media to essentially let the country know what Democrats are trying to do for them and hopefully move it forward.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. It's very timely because Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer actually just announced that the HEROES Act will be our starting position. That's where we're going to negotiate from. That's what we're going to push. We're no longer going to start with the 1.8, 2 trillion, 2.2 trillion that was being discussed prior to the election. And Mark Buchanan, who's the chair of the Progressive Caucus, has been absolutely critical to the success of the HEROES Act and progressive priorities. So we're going to start from a bold position.
That's great news. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents Silicon Valley in California, the 17th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. And you can tweet him at Rep, as in representative, R-E-P, Rep, Ro, R-O, Khanna, K-H-A-N-N-A. Rep Ro Khanna on Twitter. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's talk media for the sane among us. The Thom Hartmann Program, our national town hall meeting today with Congressman Ro Khanna. For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The whole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nations simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book. Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shah. On the Science Revolution this week is Brian C. Murescu. He'll be talking about how psychedelics played a role in the founding of Christianity and how Christian beliefs and traditions may have evolved in part from incorporating pagan rituals that use psychedelic drugs. Also, senior nuclear specialist with Greenpeace, Sean Burney, is here about how Fukushima poses a threat of damage to human DNA. Psychoanalyst and clinical professor Dr. Justin Frank drops by on the psychological bases for Trump's need to sue. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. And welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the first hour of our program today, taking your calls for the hour, a national town hall meeting here. And Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Paul in Illinois, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, Congressman. I just want to know. Hi, Paul. Is there any? Hi, Congressman. Is there any way that we can get the information that was that Trump and his cronies classified? Are they just right now kind of destroying all the evidence that would stop them being prosecuted? I mean, Trump and Barr and all the rest of his cronies, Nunes and all of those. Or are they just going to get away with the crimes they committed and destroy the evidence?
Well, Paul, I think it's a very good point. The destruction of property is a huge crime, but obviously if they've committed crimes, there's nothing that would prevent them from committing future crimes. What we can do on the Oversight Committee is make it clear that we are requesting preservation of any documents and will continue to investigate it. And while Trump himself may be difficult to put in jail, cabinet members and those who are under Trump often suffer consequences. So I think it's a big risk for them to continue to do that.
Patrick in East Lansing, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman Khanna. I respect you enormously, and I just wanted to ask you about your answer on the Electoral College, because I'm working with Democrats in the U.S. House who are caucusing and discussing this, and I'm aware that the leadership, Nancy Pelosi's team and Rosa Brooks at Georgetown Law, gamed this out. So I want to question your answer and hope that you have a plan to answer what I think is the GOP strategy, because I took your answer to be different from what the constitutional scholars have told us is the law, that Congress has the final answer and that the state legislatures have the power to disregard under Article 2 the state and federal law requirements that they follow the popular vote. And Ed Foley at Ohio State has written this up in the Atlantic, and Larry Lessig at Harvard and Jeannie Gerson in the New Yorker. So I think we have a consensus on 3 points that I think you got wrong. Number one, the states do have laws, but the state legislators are free to disregard them under Article 2, and that would simply trigger the governor or the state Supreme Court certifying the alternate slate, in this case Biden, who won the popular vote, and we'd have the competing slate of electors problem we had in 1876. Fast forward to Amendment 12, and it's clear that if they do get 2 or 3 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, or you could add either or of Georgia or Arizona, so we only need a few states where the Trump electors come into Congress. Jeannie Gerson and Larry Lessig and Ed Foley have made it absolutely clear that it's controlled by the language of Amendment 12. And the question is, in the language of Amendment 12, if there's no majority for any candidate to get to 270 electoral college votes, either because there's a competing slate of electors, as there was in 1876 with Florida.
Patrick, you need to cut to the chase here.
Cut to the chase is that if they vote by delegation, the Democrats have only 23 states and they lose, and Trump has a path. And my question is, what is the House majority Democrats doing to win the procedural vote to follow the Electoral Count Act, which specifies a different procedure for resolving this problem?
Well, I appreciate that, Patrick. I think that's exactly the point. The Electoral Count Act, which was passed in 1887, was after the 1876 election, and that's what says that the deference of the electoral votes needs to go to the governor in the Secretary of State, and most of these states have laws that require the state legislatures to follow the popular vote winner. Now, the state legislature could disregard that, and they could invoke their constitutional right to elect someone in disregard of the state law. I think given the statements of the state legislatures and those leaders, that's highly unlikely that they would actually do that. But if they do that, and if they were to elect a Trump slate of electors, or if they were to say that our state shouldn't send in any electors to deprive Biden of the 270 count, then you would have a constitutional crisis that would be a fight in Congress. I don't want to alarm people, though, because I don't see that to be a likely scenario. But it is something that the Speaker and others are aware of.
What do you think about folks who are suggesting that this is just a dry run for 2024, where they get an actual competent neo-fascist, somebody like Tom Cotton, and it's a squeaker, more of a squeaker of an election, more like 2016, and this would be the Republicans' plan B if they don't win the election? That we should do something to stop that from happening.
I don't rule out Trump running again. I mean, I think he is setting this up in part to say that it was stolen from him, stolen from the Republicans, and they believe that will help their base be energized to try to fight back and take back the presidency in 4 years. So I definitely think that's part of their calculation, and I think it's part of why you have seen such reluctance from any Republicans to break from Trump. I mean, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, which highlights the importance of doing away with the Electoral College. Ora in Springfield, Massachusetts. Ora, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, thank you. Congressman, I have been wondering about the 19th Amendment. People say we do not have the right to vote, and yet the verbiage of the 19th Amendment is that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be abridged or whatever.
On the basis of sex. Yeah.
I tried to commit it to memory. I got macular, so I can't read. Anyway, my question is, the right to vote is specifically stated in the first paragraph.
Well, what did they achieve?
So, Congressman?
In terms of the need to uphold the right to vote as a key bedrock of our democracy and things that it shouldn't be infringed on, I think that's what you were driving at. And I agree with you. I mean, I think the right to vote has been abridged in so many ways, whether that is throwing people off voter rolls, whether it is not having open enough polling places, whether it is systematically discriminating it because people's signatures aren't matching exactly what was on file. So the real scandal is how much our country is still infringing on the right to vote.
Isn't it amazing that if if Brian Kemp wanted to take away a Georgia citizen's gun, he'd have to go to court. If he wanted to take away, because we have gun rights, if he wanted to take away their house, he'd have to go to court because we have property rights. But if he wants to take away their right to vote, take them off the voting rolls, he can just do it. I mean,
that's
don't
a
we
great
need to
point.
fix this?
That's a great point. And you know, some people have proposed that we have a constitutional amendment explicitly again about a right to vote, so that you have the same type of scrutiny on it as we do on the other rights. But it is really unconscionable what's happening in Georgia. I mean, if it weren't for Kemp, Biden would probably have been up on that state over at least over 100,000 votes, and that's a conservative estimate.
Yeah, amen. Scott in Ithaca, New York, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna. We got a minute and 15 seconds.
Okay, I'll try to spit this out really quickly. So is there a resolve in Congress, instead of doing $1-2 trillion kind of, you know, reimbursements or whatever that's not the right word, but to the American public, instead of doing that, we have a real problem with the schools. They don't have enough space in the schools to space the students out safely because of COVID. And we also have parents of some of those kids that are in the 5 to 13-year-old range, the parents of those kids. They can't get back to work. I have an initiative on Change.org to actually fund something like that at about $10 billion to basically fund more spaces outside of the school system, using teachers, using tutors, and getting those parents back to work. And I've gotten some positive feedback on
So
it
your
first.
question,
I'm actually
Scott?
getting ready to tweet it to you, too.
Well, Scott, please send it to me. I mean, I think you're right that we need to be funding the schools. We need to be mindful of parents and their need to return to work and the obligations that child rearing place on them. So if there's a proposal you have and it's $10 billion, I'm happy to look at it.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 17th District of California in the U.S. House. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna right after this on this Friday the 13th. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Tom in North Hollywood, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom. This is Tom from GL Pages. Anyway, Ro, first off, I want to say we, the people, are the government, and we must never, ever forget that. I also want to say thank you to Devil Radio, and the only progressive radio station in Wisconsin that I listen to. Ro, my question to you is this. I don't understand how, when we have H.R. 1, For the People Act of 2019, how it is that that's not brought out, such as bullet points, such as a website that's called forthepeopleact.gov or .com. Why it is that we don't message, and why is it that we don't put things in simple language? We would have the votes from we the people if we actually, I guess, dumbed it down a little bit, but made it where it was more of a marketing thing. Can you answer to me why it is that whenever we have something that passes through Congress, that we're not setting this up almost like a marketing campaign?
Tom, it's a great point, and I think that you're right. I mean, We the People has some very basic things in it. It says we should be protecting the right to vote so that the people can't be thrown off the voter rolls. It says that we want to give voters, make every voter a donor so that that we democratize campaign finance reform. It says that we shouldn't be having gerrymandering of districts. And I think having 4 or 5 key points about the structural reforms that are in that bill that would make democracy more functional, whether you're a liberal, a progressive, or a conservative, it's just returning power to the people. I think that's a good idea, and I will suggest that to colleagues.
Richard in Pasadena, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, what I see is the way to do it, no oppression, no suppression, no purging, is make the requirements U.S. citizenship, adult age, U.S. Social Security number. Everybody in the nation is the same. It's perfect democracy at voting level. What do you think?
I'm sorry, I missed that. So the point is, what about?
He was suggesting basically a universal right to vote for all citizens who have demonstrated their citizenship through having a Social Security number and can prove that they're residents of the U.S.
I mean, we have every citizen over 18, and I would say over 16 has the right to vote. I agree with that, and I think that if you're saying that should we have some automatic registration of voters, I would be for that, especially in terms of in high school at 16, if you are a citizen and you have the school get people registered. But what the big problem is the intentional suppression of the vote, and that's what we have to litigate, where you have people being thrown off rolls and polling places closing.
And that's where an absolute right to vote would solve that problem, right?
That's right. And Jesse Jackson Jr. actually had this proposal for an amendment which would have a constitutional amendment for a right to vote. And people think, well, we already have that in the post-Civil War amendment, so that was simply based on slavery. We don't have a broader right to vote amendment to get that sort of scrutiny by the courts.
There you go. Congressman Ro Khanna with us. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, I don't think so. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So John Kasich was recently on CNN talking about how Democrats need to be listening to rural America, words to that effect. No, I think Democrats need to be talking to rural America and reminding rural America that it was a Democratic president that got them Social Security. It was a Democratic president that brought electricity to rural America, the RTA through, or the REA rather through the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It was the Democratic Party who brought phones to rural America. It was the Democratic Party that brought Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and public education to rural America, subsidized all those things. Democrats don't need to be listening to rural America. They need to be talking to rural America. There's over 1,500 right-wing radio stations in rural America talking smack all the time, 24/7, and none in rural America carrying a progressive message. That's what Democrats need to be paying attention to. You can check out our new video on this over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back, Congressman Ro Khanna, taking your calls for the hour. And John in Jeffersonville, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, Congressman Khanna, I had, in my life experience, I've had some run-ins with viruses. I had the HPV virus that gave me cancer, and on Monday I have to go in and I had 34 radiation treatments through my jaw. And on Monday, I have to have a section of my jaw removed and a piece of the bone in my back put in my jaw. That was from a virus. And I had polio, and I was paralyzed for a year from my waist down. I'm the same age you are, Tom. And so with all of that's not counting the herpes virus. It was not genital. It was around the lips and stuff. I've had 3 viruses, and I'm telling you it's important. How can we get people to realize this stuff is serious? If I get this virus, I'm dead. And like I said, my body won't withstand another hit. So that's my question for the Congress. By the way, I love
John,
you guys.
First of all, thank you for sharing your story, and I admire your resilience and your perseverance in the face of adversity. I think that is very courageous and admirable. And you're right. I mean, look, we don't know how serious COVID is. We don't know how serious it's going to be and the long-term implications for those who have gotten it. We know it's deadly. We know that
240,000 Americans have died. But of the millions of people who have the disease, we don't know what the consequences years out are going to be. And that is why having a precaution and not just rushing to open things or prioritizing short-term gains at the expense of the public health is so important. And I fundamentally believe that's why Joe Biden won. I mean, the country wants sober, wise leadership that recognizes what a serious threat this is and not a bravado of invincibility.
Tim in Matawan, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman, I have one question for you. Why is it during the campaign I heard nothing about the $1.1 trillion that the Republicans already took for their tax cut out of Social Security and Medicare?
Tim, you're right. I mean, sometimes the Democrats forget the basics, and the basics are they were already took money out of Social Security and Medicare with their tax cuts, and their plans. Trump's plans were to submit budgets to bankrupt Social Security and Medicare, and that is something that the Republicans have always wanted to do, to take money out of Social Security and Medicare. Of course, it's not going to happen now, and what we need to do, if anything, is expand Social Security and Medicare to have a true dignified retirement for people who have worked and to provide health care for everyone.
Bob in Fresno, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman and Tom. Is there any appetite or talk about repealing the SALT provision of the 2017 tax cut bill that increased my taxes?
Bob, there is, and what we say is, people say, well, isn't that going to help people who are middle class and upper middle class? And I say the problem is that you have given tax cuts to the very, very wealthy, to the huge corporations and to the wealthy, to tax people who are making between $100,000 and $200,000. And while I have more sympathy for people who are making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, the idea that the bulk of the tax burden should fall on middle class and families is wrong. I'd rather we have a wealth tax, and I'd rather we have the upper income taxed properly and corporations taxed properly to pay for revenue. So it is on the table.
In Chicago. Laura in Chicago. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. We have a minute and a half.
Hi. Absolutely. Excellent. Representative Khanna, the Trumpers are not going to go away. And I think the Democrats should diffuse this situation by throwing them an olive branch. And that is a national, independent, multi-partisan elections commission to start with H.R. 1 as a template and fill in the holes, because there were some holes in H.R. 1. So we could engage the Trump supporters in, reforming the system, and we could look at the entire system, how we vote, voter suppression, gerrymandering, the Electoral College, and have the experts, non-politician experts in an independent multi-partisan commission.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we're running out of time here.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent suggestion. I mean, suddenly the Republicans are complaining that states do things differently after having proclaimed states' rights for the last 50 years. It's absurd that we don't have national standards in this country safeguarding the right to vote. It's absurd that we allow every state to make their own idiosyncratic rules about when to count ballots, about who to have on rolls, with absolutely no national standards. So if the Republicans really want to talk about every vote counting and election security and reforms, let's create a commission and establish national standards for what it's going to require for people to have full confidence in the system.
Congressman Khanna, thanks so much for dropping by. Always great having you on.
Thanks, Tom. I always love doing the show. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll be back. Trita Parsi is going to be with us in just a moment, and then it'll be Anything Goes Friday for the rest of the day. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
Reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space, Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being. It is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have morality on obedience, have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game. Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart. Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyesa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn, a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by 4 arrows.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Dr. Trita Parsi, the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. QuincyINST.org is the website, or responsiblestatecraft.org. And you can tweet him at tparsi, P-A-R-S-I. Dr. Parsi, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. The Iran nuclear deal is, I thought this was like one of the major accomplishments of the Obama administration and the world. I mean, there were, 5 or 6 countries who were signatories to this. And we know, Donald Trump tried to blow it up. Where are we at with that? What are the odds that President-elect Biden will bring it back? And what are the potential obstacles to that Trump might have laid in the path of President Biden?
Yes, so Trump has done everything he can to try to destroy the deal, and he's failed, which tells you something about the political will of the other actors. They all see it, as does the previous administration and the majority of American people, as squarely in the U.S. national interest to continue it. But he's done everything he can. Trump has said that Biden has said that he wants to go back into it. All, with the exception of 2 Democratic candidates for president, said that they would go back to it. It is part of the Democratic platform to rejoin it, and all major advisors to Biden have been on record for months now saying that they want to go back into it and that the policies of Trump have been a failure. So I think expectations are high that Biden absolutely has to try to go back to it. And I think actually the political price he will pay is not for trying to go back into it, is if he fails to try to go back into it. But
so
the
what's
Trump
involved
administration
in
is
that?
trying to make that more difficult by imposing more sanctions and increasing their collaboration with Israel, Saudi Arabia, and UAE in the next 10 weeks to try to make it as difficult as possible for Trump to be able to rejoin this agreement.
Yeah, this is sort of the anti-Iran coalition, and we just started shipping massive amounts of hardware to the UAE. The UAE and Saudi Arabia, of course, combined to blockade Qatar back when Jared Kushner was looking to borrow $1 billion to get out of his real estate deal on 666 Fifth Avenue. Finally, the blockade ended right around the same time that Jared Kushner got his $1 billion from a fund that the second largest investor was the Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund. I mean, there's weird stuff going on in the Middle East. Can you explain the dynamics of all this and how it might be playing out?
Well, it's really important that you raise this because we have now, as a result of what they call the peace deal between Israel and UAE, we have six-folded the arms sales to the UAE, gone from roughly $4 to $24 billion. It's the weirdest peace deal I've ever heard of because usually when you have a peace deal, you have less arms sales, not more. This time around, we have six-folded them to the UAE, and we're going to increase them to Israel as well. And if this continues, in which we continue to arm one side of the Middle East to the teeth, and then expect that the other side will not only not try to arm conventionally, but also continue to abide by an agreement that closes off any path they have to a nuclear weapon, then I think that is a really naive calculation. If we want this nuclear deal to work, then it needs to be embedded into a strategic context that makes sense for it to survive, that enables it to survive by making it attractive to both the United States and to the Iranians. And that's not going to be the case if we continue to arm to the teeth so many countries in the Middle East that have their own rivalries with Iran.
Is there an international consensus around that? I mean, the Iran deal was not a unilateral deal or a bilateral deal.
The only countries that are on record opposing it is actually Israel, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. The rest of the world welcome it strongly. It got passed in the UN Security Council 15-0. So the idea that it's a controversial deal, it's only been controversial in those three countries and in the U.S. Congress. And the rest of the world...
I mean, is there an international consensus that, maybe arming the UAE like this was not a good idea, that U.S. arms sales or any kind of arms sales to other countries in the region really need to now be incorporated into or considered as part of a renewed Iran nuclear deal? Or is this the sort of thing that we can just rejoin like the Paris Accords?
There is a consensus about rejoining. There's unfortunately not a consensus about armament in the Middle East because almost all of these other countries, Europeans included, like to sell weapons to the Middle East, particularly the Persian Gulf countries that have a higher per capita expenditure on military equipment than any other region of the world. So as long as there is that opportunity to make money off of these oil-rich, gas-rich Arab authoritarian states that love to buy weapons, unfortunately, we're not going to see an international consensus being built against such arms sales. However, we should be quite clear that we cannot have a massive amount of arms sales and stability at the same time. We have to choose one of the two.
Are you seeing any signals, or has anybody thrown up any warning flags that Donald Trump, part of his Hail Mary approach as we close in on mid-December when the states have to certify their electoral votes and all this sort of thing, and the election becomes legally real, that one of his strategies might be to create a crisis in the Middle East that would distract us or even provide him with some basis for a state of emergency or what, or just good old-fashioned vengeance that he's or dancing to the tune of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel, and create a confrontation with Iran that could be disastrous?
I think, unfortunately, the risk is there. I don't know if it would be because this is something Trump actually wants to do, but rather that at this stage, now when the elections essentially are over, that this will be something that is happening because he's not paying attention to anything than his own political survival. And as a result, those in his administration that have been pushing for a war with Iran or other forms of confrontation have an easier time pushing those things through because Trump is not paying attention, and so many other people in the Pentagon have been removed. And at a minimum, what that can lead to is that they're sending signals to other countries, to the Saudis, for instance, that if they were to initiate something, the U.S. would not object to it. That's what I think is the main risk in the next 2 months before inauguration, not necessarily that the U.S. itself were to do something.
But war by proxy. And are we talking about war, or are we just talking about conflict?
It's unclear. What we do know is that Elliot Abrams, who's the Iran coordinator for Trump, left for Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE on Monday. And then next week, the Undersecretary for Military and Political Affairs from the State Department is going to go to those same 3 countries. And Pompeo himself is in Israel. So there is an unusual amount of activity with those 3 countries. And the topic of conversations, according to the U.S. State Department itself, has been Iran and nothing but Iran. So there's clearly a tremendous amount of activity going on. But what can be done, what will be done, what they're really planning to do, we can only speculate about.
Is there any sort of call to action for, we have about 45 seconds here before we hit a break. Is there any call to action to American citizens? Call your members of Congress and say we really don't want a war with Iran, for example? Or is there any way to stop this train?
I think it would be very valuable if citizens were to make such calls, and also make calls and saying, expecting Congress to help create political space for a Biden administration to rejoin the nuclear deal, which is the best guarantee we have right now for making sure that there isn't war.
Yeah, remarkable stuff. Dr. Trita Parsi, the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. T. Parsi or Quincy INST are the Twitter handles. Dr. Parsi, thanks for dropping by. It's always informative.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great talking with you. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. It is now officially Anything Goes Friday. Your calls on whatever topic you'd like to discuss right after this. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, defending America from the weapons of mass deception.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And it's Anything Goes Friday the 13th, which I always thought of as a really lucky day. We'll be back with your calls after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching.
Hey there. Good afternoon, Tofu Turkey Tom. I got a question that I'm kind of surprised isn't coming up a lot. The costs that we, the taxpayers, are bearing. There's going to have to be a tabulation, especially now that they're talking about a lame duck rally for lawyer money. Air Force One, Air Force Two, the Trump children, they racked up a lot of costs on the taxpayers using government equipment for exclusively campaign activity. I mean, historically, a president campaigning while in Air Force One might step off to the side and say something related to the campaign while flying to a destination for official business. But this is, fossil fuels burned up.
Right. The tradition has been if there's no official business, the campaign reimburses the government for that use of Air Force One at the very least. And that, that certainly has not been happening. Plus, over $100 million has been transferred from the pockets of the taxpayers into various Trump properties as he has been traveling around the country, to play golf and things.
Tom, here in Erie, Pennsylvania, our COVID number was a steady single to low double-digit number from February until August. And then it started going 20s, maybe 30 on a high day. For the last 6 weeks, we've been in the 50s, and yesterday was our first 123. And there were 4 Trump stops here in Erie in October. So I think the whole use of the planes thing I think he may be setting up for the moneymaker after he's out of office. I think it might be the ungrateful deadbeats as a touring act. You know?
That was worthy of Phil Proctor.
Plane,
yeah.
High on Adderall, that's pharmaceutical cocaine. Donnie Trump, you better pay your bills.
There you go. Eric, in direct answer to your question, I don't know of any activity to hold them accountable right now, but, you know, one can hope because, you know, as you have so clearly pointed out, it's egregious what this guy is doing. Jerry in Kent, Washington. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. I'm a retired RN. In the last 10 years of my working life, I worked in various lockdown psych facilities. And for the last 2.5 years, I've come to the conclusion that Trump is a full-blown psychopath. And in fact, I think he suffers from cluster B personality disorder. And I was just wondering what your opinion would be on my
I agree with you, and so does pretty much every psychologist or psychiatrist that I've had on this program in the last 4 years. Nobody is pushing back on that.
Yeah, I read Mary's book. When I found out she was a clinical psychologist, you know, I bought it in a heartbeat, and I found it an interesting read. But I mean,
it's a chilling book.
Yeah, you think?
I mean, this guy has his finger on the nuclear button, you know?
I know. Yeah. Yeah, it is scary, and you know, that's for sure.
Yeah, but yes, I agree with your diagnosis, Jerry, and I think, or your analysis. Anyway, I completely agree. Thank you very much for the call. We can't get rid of this guy fast enough. I mean, you know, January 20th is just way too long away for my taste. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Dave in Las Vegas. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Mr. Hartmann, thanks for having me. Yeah, I hit a royal flush on a Friday the 13th about 5 years ago here in Vegas, $8,000.
Oh, really?
Here's my question. Yeah, so that point, here's my question. How imperative is it now that we make it mandatory for any candidate to submit their tax returns before they run to office? And I could take that off the air.
Sure. Yeah, Dave, I agree with you, and that's the kind of thing that Congress could actually make into law that I think might survive a First Amendment challenge, make it a procedural thing. Although, you know, it's possible that the Supreme Court would blow it up and say, no, you can't do that. But that said, whether we put it into law or not, I'm guessing that future presidential elections, it's going to be a much bigger deal than it has been in the past now that we realize that we've got a grifter in the White House who's $1 billion in debt, $400 million of it personally guaranteed. And, you know, he has squeezed over $100 million out of the U.S. Treasury that has gone directly into Trump properties over a 4-year period. He's been traveling on his airplane all around the world campaigning. Traditionally, when presidents use Air Force One to campaign, they reimburse the federal government for those expenses. Trump hasn't even bothered. You know, there's no accounting of this at all. He has not just pushed the boundaries, he has crashed the boundaries of legality, propriety, and, you know, frankly, everything else. So, you know, I'm with you. John in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi there, Tom. I'm calling about a big question I want to lay on you. I actually met you in Redwood City in 2008 with the Green 960 guy, but beyond that, Tom, I'm a longtime listener, and I wanted to ask you the big question with you bet, and I was during a book signing, but big question is, okay, Frank Flaguzzi on the Nicole Wallace show calls Trump a barricaded subject going back to his FBI days, okay? So this image that's beamed around the world, how going forward, I'll take this off the air, going forward as a nation, to Ferguzzi's point, how do we promote democracy with a barricaded subject in our White House? It's public housing. Just as a reminder to the folks listening, and how do we promote going forward when this nightmare, if and when it ends, how do we promote democracy to the world about voting, about, our way of life after this nightmare? Could you speak to that? You write a lot of books and.
Yeah, thank you. I think you put your finger on what the biggest piece of damage that the Trump administration has done to the United States and to democracy, just to the whole, this whole idea that really began in 1634, I think it was, when Thomas Hobbes published Leviathan, and said that people should be able to rule themselves. And, it was like this radical idea that led to the Enlightenment, that led to John Locke talking about life, liberty, and property, that led to Thomas Jefferson writing about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that led to our Constitution, that led to our Republic, that led to, we were the first advanced democracy in the world, in the modern world. And, by the turn of the millennia, by 2000, there were over 100 around the world out of the 200, I think it's 274 countries or something like that around the world. And the big battle right now, worldwide, is between countries and people who believe in small d democracy, who believe in the context of a constitutional republic, who believe that people should be able to govern themselves and that majority rule is a good thing, within the limits of not infringing the rights of minorities, versus autocracies, oligarchies, countries that autocrats, strongman governments is the general term, who are on the rise, who are on the ascendancy. We've seen strongman, wannabe dictators take over India with Modi, take over Brazil with Bolsonaro, take over the Philippines, on and on and on. And then, in some cases, they've actually flipped them out of democracy altogether, as we see with Hungary, with Viktor Orban. And I think we're watching in Poland with Duda. And this is the big battle. And these autocrats, they're saying, hey, democracy fails. Look at what happened in the United States. Democracy failed, and democracy is not reliable, and you really need a strong man to control things. So the way that we fix this, to specifically answer your question, the way that we fix this is we heal America. We hold an election, and we elect somebody other than the strong man, the wannabe dictator, Donald Trump, and we've done that. We actually install that new president, that would be Joe Biden, and his vice president, Kamala Harris. We actually install them. We engage in the process of clawing government back from the right-wing billionaires and giant corporations on whose behalf Donald Trump has been governing. And that's going to be the biggest part. That's going to be the most difficult part. That's going to be the part that's going to take at least the next 4 years. And we try to put into place, and I say try because it's going to be a huge challenge given how the Supreme Court has corrupted our government by, in 1976 and 1978, and then again in 2010 with Citizens United, handing down from high decisions that say, well, if a billionaire wants to own a politician, that's not corruption, that's not bribery, that's free speech. Money's not money, it's speech. Didn't you know that? And then, we get these idiots like Sam Alito, who just gave this speech yesterday to the Federalist Society, a totally partisan, just a hack job. I mean, we now have people on the Supreme Court who don't believe in democracy, who are, essentially open advocates for oligarchy. So we've got a big lift in this country. And before we can start lecturing the world again about democracy, we've got to restore democracy to the United States of America. And that's going to be a huge job. I think people massively underestimate the damage that Donald Trump has done and the corrupt. I mean, everybody knows about Bill Barr and how corrupt he is and how he was corrupt all the way back to '92 when he was working for George Herbert Walker Bush and shut down the Iran-Contra investigation. He is the tip of the iceberg. And Trump has buried them all through our government. We got a big job.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That said, it's a job that I believe we can do if we stay vigilant, stay alert, and stay engaged. We'll be back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet, he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out, and he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. So we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are signed up, for supporters of our program. And it's about how Donald Trump, 16 days after Mr. Khashoggi was murdered by the Saudis in Turkey and his body dismembered and vanished, 16 days after that happened, without notifying Congress and with virtually no mention to anybody, Donald Trump authorized the transfer of top-secret nuclear technology to the Saudis. This should be a serious issue. Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, is raising hell about it because Khashoggi lived in Virginia. But I think everybody in Congress should be raising hell about this. And when you back this up with this new report out from ProPublica that the Saudis were involved in 9/11, it gets real interesting. So you can check that out over at thomhartmann.com. You know, look for our basically members-only video. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. Dave in Houston, Texas. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. You know, there's this call from some of your hosts for the Democrats to come out and say we won the election fair and square and to stop, you know, just staying silent. I emailed Chuck Schumer. He lives in New York. I live in Houston. I wanted to reach out to some Democratic leaders to, you know, get them to that rally cry to, you know, stand up for it. And
well, Schumer has said that. It's the Republicans who are refusing to acknowledge it, Dave.
Yeah. Well, you know, I know, but the Democrats, they were saying, the Democrats, you know, one of your hosts was saying they're staying silent. They're not saying anything. Maybe that was, you know, 2 days ago.
That's not been, you know, I can't speak for any of the other hosts here on SiriusXM, but that has not been what I've been hearing. What I've been hearing is a lot of yelling and screaming and, you know, hey, you guys, and what's wrong with you idiots? And, you know, I mean, they're not using quite that language, but I certainly would. The Democrats are speaking out. The problem is that, you know, we still have this if it bleeds, it leads media mentality. As long as Donald Trump's circus is more entertaining than Chuck Schumer reading a script in a boring monotone on the floor of the Senate, that, you know, the TV cameras are always going to go to Donald Trump. And he knows that. I mean, he spent, what, 8-10 years with NBC with a coach teaching him how to do reality television. He really knows how to do it, and he does a very good job of it. It's insane what he does, but he's very good at being a TV star. It's basically he's been training his whole life for it. So, you know, I think it's the problem is our media is not letting that message through. It's just like, you know, people call up when I've got Ro Khanna or Pramila Jayapal or Mark Pocan on, you know, the three primary leaders of the Progressive Caucus. And they'll say, well, why aren't you guys holding press conferences and talking about your progressive agenda? And they're like, we hold a press conference every damn week. Where, you know, one of us is speaking out almost every day. It just doesn't get covered because they're not pulling out a blowtorch and setting their hair on fire. So you know, this is a real problem that we have with our media, Dave. But they are speaking out. The problem is these Republicans. I mean, you know, Ron Johnson, the stupidest man in the United States Senate, was asked by a reporter yesterday, are you going to congratulate Biden? And he said, no. And the reporter said, why? And he said, you know, what's there to congratulate him for? I mean, honest to God, Ron Johnson is not just the stupidest man in the United States Senate, although Tommy Tuberville is you know, close behind. The guy who was just elected, who beat Doug Jones down in Alabama, tweeted yesterday that his father fought in World War II to defeat socialism. And I'm like, whoa, we fought in World War II to defeat fascism, right-wing government, not left-wing government. In fact, our ally was the USSR. Our ally was Medicare for all, England. It's like, oh my God, these Republicans, they don't even go to high school, or at least they didn't pay attention. Probably most of them are rich like Donald Trump and paid somebody else to take their damn tests. Anyhow, Dave, I gotta move along, but thank you for the call. Spot on. Dolores in Lake Bay, Washington. Hey, Dolores, what's up?
I'm just curious, Tom. I want that list of all the corporations that don't pay taxes. So I've got something to say that we can pay for what the Democrats want to do if those companies would pay taxes. So where do I get that list?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, Dolores. It's kind of a moving target, but I think you could probably just take the 500 largest corporations in America and safely assume that probably 80% of them fall into that category. But I'm sorry, I don't have a glib or easy or off the top of my head answer. Economic Policy Institute is a really good group and a really good source for a lot of that kind of information, and you might want to check there. There are other good groups. Let me ponder that, and if I can find a source for that, Dolores, I'll rant about it on Monday. Thank you for the call. Excellent question. Sorry I didn't have an excellent answer. Meg in Lexington, Virginia. Hey, Meg, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. This is the first time I've talked to you.
Well, thank you, Meg.
Okay, so I have a quick question. Okay, so I am very concerned about this Proud Boy March that is supposed to happen tomorrow in D.C., among other cities in the nation. I'm hearing this. And the word on the street is, quote unquote, that he is hoping, and by he I mean Trump is hoping that people will go to protest the Proud Boys, hoping that there will be some kind of civil unrest or some kind of violence, in which case he could declare martial law and continue to be president. My question is, A, is that true? And B, if he is able to be president, how long would we be stuck with him?
Yeah. What I've heard, and I don't, and I do take it seriously. I don't dismiss these reports and concerns. Is that Trump has brought up the Insurrection Act of 1803 or 1807, which allows the federal government basically to militarize at the federal level, to militarize our country, and put down an insurrection, and declare a state of emergency and perhaps suspend elections. That's not in the Insurrection Act, but Trump. Or at least some people around Trump, and I don't know specifically who, but I would put Stephen Miller at the top of that list, think that they might be able to pull it off and they might be able to get the Supreme Court to help them out. I'm very skeptical that even the Supreme Court would go along with that. I'm very skeptical that the military would go along with that. The thing that really encourages me is General Mark Milley. He is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is the most senior military official, short of the Secretary of Defense, in the United States. And he gave a speech at the Pentagon just a couple of days ago. He said, "We are unique among militaries. We do not take an oath to a king or a queen, a tyrant or a dictator. We do not take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we will protect and defend that document regardless of personal price." That's an amazing thing to say, and it really speaks to the brilliance of the framers of the Constitution, that the Constitution, in other countries, people take an oath to the nation. And so any new leader comes along and says, "I'm in charge of the nation, so I represent the nation, so you took an oath to me." And of course, in dictatorships, you take an oath to the dictator. But in the United States, and we were unique among nations in the world in this regard, I mean, literally unique, even including the Roman Republic and the Greek democracies, to be the first country that was founded on an idea where, the idea of a pluralistic democratic republic, where the elected officials take an oath not to the country, not to the leader, but to the idea. And I mean, what an incredible thing. And so here we've got the chief, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying, I'm still with this. And he's the only guy in the senior military leadership that Trump has not replaced. There are people who are concerned that Trump's decapitation of the Pentagon has been in preparation for the scenario that you're describing, Meg, whether it's this weekend or whether it's next weekend or whether they keep trying over and over and over again. I don't know if that's the case. None of us know. But I do know that there are Republicans who are starting to push back. And I think if Trump tried to do something like that, that would be the one that would push it over the top. There's also a story over at rawstory.com that Trump is building a moat around the White House right now. They're digging this trench, apparently around the White House. And it's like, what are they going to do? Put alligators in it? He's got his non-scalable wall up right now. So, I mean, he's going full dictator. I don't think it's going to work for him. I would assign the possibility of it working for him at less than 1%. And probably 5 weeks ago, I would have said less than 10%. I think it's diminishing every day. But on the other hand, I've gotten 12 emails since I went to sleep last night from Trump, from his campaign, from Freedom Works, and from other right-wing groups saying that the Democrats are trying to steal the election and Joe Biden and, election fraud, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they're doing everything they can to attack our democracy. They make no bones about it. These guys like that idiot Ron Johnson, they are literally attacking our democracy, the idea of our democracy by saying that we're not going to take seriously the will of the people in an election. It's obscene, but I don't think it's going to work. So, Meg, thank you for that. Thank you for that call. It is very troubling. And I just saw that I've only got 20 seconds. Kelly, I just tried to put you on the air, but I'll pick your call up on the other side. I just want to emphasize what I just said. The importance of the idea of America, the importance of America being viewed as a concept of this idea of democracy. We can't ever let go of this. It's an idea. This is the great strength of America. This is what kept us through the Civil War. This is what kept us through World War I and World War II and the Great Depression. And this is what will keep us through this crisis of the Trump presidency. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
A moat around the White House? Really? It's incredible. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Dr. Randy in Portland. Hey, Randy, what's up?
Well, this is kind of a review. Some weeks ago, I talked about the Oregon voting history using Track My Vote, which worked well, and that we had such a high participation in Oregon. It was peaceful. And you just see the concern of all the other states when Oregon, Washington, California had such a stable vote-by-mail system. What the news media doesn't really cover is that in advance are the voters' pamphlets, which come to you. In this year, it had two sections, the candidates in one booklet and the all the issues and stuff in the other pamphlet. But what it does, it increases participation, that you get a chance to see the candidates and their statements well in advance, that you have time to talk with other people in advance. And I think all in all, it has just created a greater participation for everyone, and not just on the national and state level, but in the county issues and things. And so it's a great benefit, a good model for the nation. And I hope hopefully increases the participation at the local level, county level, gives you a chance to look at your county and see how it functions. And just wanted to remind people of this history and how well it has worked.
Yeah, I'm with you, and Oregon is an example for the rest of the nation. We did this 20 years ago. Washington State did it, 6-8 years ago, something like that, and it's working really well for them. I believe that Utah has done it. Hawaii, if I'm remembering correctly, there's 5 states altogether. Colorado, all vote by mail. California, that was, by the governor, Governor Newsom ordered that ballots be sent out to everybody, but, it's functionally the same thing. And my sense of it is, Randy, we moved to Oregon here probably, 15, 16, maybe 13 years ago. Lived here for 5 years, then went to D.C. and lived there for 7 years, and then came back here. And having to vote in D.C. in person, I really missed Oregon. I mean, it's one of those things where, once you try it out, once you experience vote by mail, once you get that ballot in the mail and you sit down with that voter pamphlet that you're talking about, which is like a small booklet now. I mean, it's close to 100 pages, I think. And it's got in detail about, the ballot initiatives and the judges and the candidates and everything else. You get informed by voting. And you also have to seek out information in order to be a competent voter. So I'm totally with you. And I think that so many people voted by mail in this election because of the pandemic that there is going to be a loud clamor for vote by mail from other states all around the country. And of course you're going to have Republicans trying to resist it everywhere they can because at least in the pandemic, they think that it's mostly Democrats voting by mail. But Randy, thanks a lot for the call. Spot on. And thank you for revisiting that topic. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. I'm speaking at the Bioneers 2020 conference, whose theme is Beyond the Great Unraveling, Weaving the World Anew. It's running December 5th and 6th and 12th and 13th. My keynote is How All Life is Organized Around Democracy. Bioneers from around the world will gather online for world-class keynote presentations, interactive networking, and engaging panel discussions with leaders on the cutting edge of systems change. Our shared work is more important now than ever, and we're inviting you to become part of this change. Tickets are available at Bioneers.org, and there's a 20% discount with the code TOM, T-H-O-M. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. James in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. First, I just want to thank you for being one of the few national dialogues for rational thought and sanity that's left.
Thank you, James.
I'm an over-the-road. Oh, thank you. I'm an over-the-road trucker, and it just. I mean, it's like I'm living in an alternate universe. It's an episode of Twilight Zone. All these people that I'm talking to that are talking about, there's thousands of examples of how the election was thrown by these Democrats. And you try telling them that it's almost impossible to throw an election across this country in all these different states. But where are they getting this information? I mean, I can't find it anywhere. And they're so certain about it.
Yeah, if you were to if you were to take your Facebook account and start following a bunch of right-wing sources, that would cause Facebook's algorithm to start funneling more and more of that kind of crap into your feed, into your timeline or whatever it's called on Facebook. And you would see it. Most of this is coming out of Facebook. But there's a fair amount of it popping up on YouTube and Google and other right-wing sites, and an awful lot of it on right-wing hate radio all across the country. And on, Fox News has kind of backed away from it, but One America Network and Newsmax, the other two right-wing TV networks, are just going full tilt boogie on this. These are folks who absolutely hate the idea of majority rule, democracy. They are very happy with the fact that, Republicans in the United States Senate represent 15 million fewer Americans than do the Democrats, yet they have control. that Trump got 3 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton, yet he became president. They're fine with minority rule. I would say, James, the next time one of your trucker buddies, because you're not going to be able to knock down, if you say, if they say, well, I saw a video of them stealing the votes in Oklahoma. I saw it, on YouTube, or I saw it. You can't say, no, you didn't see that, right? You can't argue with people who believe phony videos or phony lies that they've heard. So I think the best response is to say, yeah, our election system really is creaky and cranky and clunky, and we really ought to do what all the other major democracies in the world do, which is have everybody vote by mail. That way there is a paper ballot that's connected to your name, and you can check and make sure that it actually was received by the state. You can see that the state actually counted your vote. It doesn't reveal who you voted for, but it does tell if your vote was counted. We all should be working to get paper ballots and vote by mail so that we can have absolutely transparent elections that are totally clean. I completely agree with you. That's how I would respond to them, James. What do you think?
Well, like you said, you're assuming you can get that far without the without all the emotions and expletives and the irrationality exploding. But it's the sick part is they believe this. And that if you try to contradict, like you said, with real media, with objective truth, they deny it. They say, oh, that's phony. Oh, that's not real. That's conspiracy.
Yeah, you can say, oh, that was debunked by the New York Times. That was debunked by the Washington Post. That's why I would, one of my, I was going to say neighbors, but more of an acquaintance, said something like this to me in email the other day. And I just sent back an email reply saying, who was saying, hey, there's real problems, and I'm concerned that, the Democrats are trying to steal our election, blah, blah, blah. And I just replied saying, this is somebody I knew years ago, and I replied saying, I agree with you that our election system in the United States is a mess. And we need every state in the union to have vote by mail like I have here in Oregon. In Oregon, my ballot is a paper ballot. I fill it out, I mail it in, it's postage paid, I don't even have to put a stamp on the envelope, and then I can go on the Secretary of State's website and I can see when they received it and when they counted it. And if there was any problem with it, they will tell me. If my signature didn't match or anything like that. I said, and I said to him, your state should have that too. And he replied to me saying, yeah, you're right, I need to work on that. So if we could just kind of turn this a little bit to try to turn some of these hysterical Republicans into activists for a clean election and a consistent nationwide election system, I think there might actually be a good outcome to it. And like I said, as you point out, James, so correctly, you're never going to be able to change their minds. They believe what they're believing. James, I got to move on, but thank you for the call. Camille in San Clemente, California. Hey, Camille, what's up?
Hi, good morning. Love your show. And I'd like to talk about the creative intelligence that exists and that we have it. We own it. It is ours. And the power of the designs of the subatomic nuclear events, which is the SANE, subatomic nuclear events. We had a gain-of-function laboratory in Fort Detrick that actually helped produce our pandemic. And
no.
It is...
Camille,
yeah.
Our pandemic came from a virus that came from bats in China.
Look at Francis Boyle on YouTube. He has the smoking gun.
Right. I can give you a half a dozen crackpots who will give you different theories, and that's a crackpot theory, Camille. And you need to get it. Just because one person on YouTube says, I've got the proof, doesn't mean that there's any proof. The fact of the matter is this virus has been around for a long time. It hasn't been in the human population for a long time, but it's been in animals for a long time. You can, looking at the DNA of a virus is like looking into a time machine. You can see where that DNA evolved, relatively when it evolved. You can see whether it originated in a lab or whether it originated in nature. This is a natural virus that came out of animals, specifically bats. They may not be the original source, but bats have a weird immune system that allow them to tolerate really high viral loads. And that bat somehow ended up in a market in Wuhan, China. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
For today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of Anything Goes, Friday the 13th edition. No, it's not scary. There's kind of scary stuff going on in Washington, D.C., but scary is the wrong word. Weird. Trump building a moat around the White House, I doubt it. I'm guessing that it's probably, they're probably replacing a sewer line or something. Maybe Trump's gold toilet got backed up. Maybe he's been eating too much fast food. There was a report last week from a staffer inside the White House that some of the staffers were burning scented candles because the smell was getting pretty bad from all the fast food that Trump was having delivered. Honest to God, I'm not making this up. So maybe they do have to replace a sewer line. God only knows. But anyway, there's that. I don't think he's building a moat. And even if he did, I don't think it would help. That's why we have ladders and planks and things like that. But anyhow, it's Anything Goes Friday, so let's pick up your phone calls. Brad in Prattville, Alabama. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I've noticed over the last couple of weeks you've been talking about how we needed to spread and get more progressive AM, especially here in some of the red states where we have absolutely nothing other than XM, free speech TV, and probably the closest thing to anything slightly progressive would be NPR. Are there any organizations that you know of that are on the ground now that are promoting, trying to get some more progressive radio in red states such as Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi?
Sadly, generally speaking, no. The one, and in fact, there's been a series of articles. There was one on Daily Kos this morning, actually, dailykos.com, about the state of radio and how across the South there are a whole bunch of radio stations that are actually owned and operated by colleges. They were originally supposed to be campus stations where people would learn how to do radio or they would program in the public interest or whatever, that are carrying Rush Limbaugh and other right-wing commercial programming, which is pretty weird. There is the Pacifica Network, pacifica.org, which runs, Pacifica owns 5 stations, and then there's probably 200 or 300 that are affiliated with Pacifica. We're on quite a few of those stations. I don't know, I'm pretty sure we're not on any of them in Alabama. I'm not even sure if there are any in Alabama that are Pacifica affiliates, but I'd be surprised if there weren't. But yeah, SiriusXM, which my call screen thing here says you're listening on SiriusXM, is great. I mean, you know, they've maintained this progressive channel, the Progress 127 channel, for years and years, and I know people are buying, you know, subscriptions to SiriusXM just to get a progressive voice, but there really needs to be progressive radio around the country. Yeah, there you go, Brad. And I'll tell you, you know, like up in you know, one of the better progressive stations in the country, KTNF, up in Minneapolis, is you know, owned by just you know, a regular guy, you know, who I don't know if he wants to be named on the air, but you know, who it was started by Janet Robert, who just did a spectacular job, and she's just a regular person too, and her husband's an ex-congressman. But they're not, you know, billionaires or anything like that. And they started this little radio station, and it's doing really, really well as a progressive radio station. And you know, and part of it is because the listeners to KTNF AM 950 will call up sponsors and say, "Hey, I'm supporting you." I mean, there's a real sense of support. We need more of that. We need more entrepreneurs around the country who are willing to pitch in and start a radio station. Same thing here in Portland. It's a low-power FM, but because it's in a metro area, pretty much all of Portland can get X-ray FM. And then they have a repeater now on the other side of the Columbia River in Vancouver, Washington as well. And that, again, was started by a local guy, Jefferson Smith, who had been an activist. He started the Bus Project way back in the day, once ran for city council. Actually, he was a member of the House of Representatives here in Oregon for a couple of years. And now he's running this radio station. He does a show just before mine in the morning. And, you know, I would encourage anybody listening to me right now who has any interest in this topic and what you and I are talking about, Brad, to reach out to you know, to the ownership, to the leadership of KTNF, or the, you know, the people there, or to X-Ray FM, to Jefferson. I know, you know, he's very public and very visible. He does a show, and ask how can I do this? You know, because these are not wealthy people who started these stations. These are average people who are willing to be entrepreneurs. Now, it's tough being an entrepreneur. Starting a small business, which is essentially what these things are, it's not for everybody. You got to be willing to do it. But you know, there's a lot of people out of work right now, and maybe some of them are willing to pull together some investors and pull together, you know, some resources. And X-Ray FM is nonprofit here in Portland. KTNF is for-profit in Minneapolis. WCPT in Chicago, for-profit station. You know, its owner is a little more wealthy, but it's a great station. I did a special for them yesterday, a 2-hour labor special that we did. And there are other stations around the country as well. I don't want to start, you know, going through a long list. It'll start sounding like I'm just advertising here. But it is possible to do. And this is a time of real crisis for AM radio after Clear Channel has gone, or what used to be Clear Channel, has gone bankrupt either 2 or 3 times now. And what used to be Cumulus has gone bankrupt at least once. In both cases, because they got the Mitt Romney types involved, you know, the vulture funds. And so there are radio stations available for sale. There are licenses, low-power FM licenses, where, particularly in a city, in a metro area. The same thing in Madison, Wisconsin, Grand Rapids, Michigan. I mean, we're in these small stations all over the country. So it's possible. It's something that's doable. And but Brad, I don't know of any organization. I wrote an open letter to Tom Steyer a year ago, begging him, don't run for president, put your money into buying. In fact, at the time, Clear Channel was for sale for $1.2 billion. And that was like 800 radio stations. And probably half of them had a right-winger on them. And I was like, you could just buy this, Well, there's 1,500 radio stations with right-wing hate radio on them, and probably 30 with progressive stuff on it in commercial radio stations in the country. So anyhow.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed is that when I speak to my neighbors, people who are just diehard Republicans, when we sit down and we just talk about the issues, we agree 80% of the time, and they get these talking points. And I've worked in construction for the last 15 years. My father-in-law, who actually turned me on to your show, is a truck driver. And I will say, I was always a hardcore Republican, so I thought, until I started listening to your show. And then I started realizing, I agree with this guy more than I disagree with him. And it just really almost opened up my eyes coming from someone who used to listen to nothing but right-wing radio and Fox News. And then I started realizing that, hey, half of what they're telling me, if not more, is just completely a fabrication. And I feel like if we can get more progressive voices out there, there'll be so many more people that'll realize, I do want to save Social Security. This is not what I've always believed. I do believe in Medicare, and I do believe in this. And we could see a huge shift here in the South.
I think you're right, Brad, and all over the country. And I think that this is one of the areas where the Democratic Party and progressive, or even corporate Democrats, right across the board, have really dropped the ball. I've referred a couple of times in the last month or so to, when a bunch of us with Air America made a pilgrimage to D.C. back in, I think it was 2006, and met with a bunch of members of Congress. And we have been begging Democrats and progressive funders and donors, the Bloombergs and the Steyers of the world and whatnot, and the Democracy Alliance folks for years to fund progressive radio. They helped fund Air America for about 3 years, and then they said, you guys are on your own. And Air America went bankrupt on a $17 million bankruptcy, which is, like 30 seconds of revenue for some of these guys. It's nothing. So, yeah, Brad, I'm with you. Brad, I got to run. I'm sorry we're hitting the break, but thank you for the call. Spot on. 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It is Anything Goes Friday the 13th edition. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Yeah, and you can also, by the way, you can check out the whole Pacifica network. As I said, we're on Pacifica stations as well, pacifica.org. And welcome back. Speaking of X-Ray FM, Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Yeah, shout out to X-Ray and Jefferson. And happy Friday, and thanks for taking my call. It was really refreshing to hear Ro Khanna open the program talking about the importance of Democrats being bold right out of the gate in January. And it's worth remembering, as you've previously numerously pointed out, that the only reason Trump got elected in 2016 is because he went against the Republicans of the last 40 years. We knew he was lying when he did this, but he promised more affordable health care and prescription drugs. He promised huge infrastructure spending and an end to the free trade deals and to protect Social Security and Medicare. These were all progressive positions, Tom. They let him crush his Republican challengers because since 1980, the GOP has been nothing but the billionaire and corporate elite-owned party. And even their own voters were seeing through that, so that they have nothing to offer to the average American. So, Tom, as Ro said, let's stay aggressive with the progressive agenda, and let's force the GOP to start doing something for the American people, or they will be exposed once and for all as the shills to the billionaires that they are. But my question, Tom, you're talking about Trump building a moat. Who knows what's going on with that? But the fact that he's disconnected from reality, he's showing no evidence, he's not conceding this election, and firing all these people. So Nancy Pelosi be considering invoking the 25th Amendment? John Brennan has urged,
she can't do it. Jeff, it has to be initiated by the vice president.
I thought it was a joint thing with her and the vice president, because I know John Brennan's called on Pence to do it. We know Pence won't, but I thought the Speaker of the House had something to do with it too.
Let me just pull it up here and fact check this. Whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such bodies as Congress may by law transmit to the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office of acting president. In other words, it has to be initiated by the vice president. So
it has to be initiated by him. Okay. Well, I mean, it doesn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt.
Maybe we'll reach that point.
Pardon?
I said maybe we'll reach that point. Maybe it's time to lobby Mike Pence. Hey, Mike, wouldn't you like to go down in history as president for a few weeks?
Well, yeah. That's what John Brennan has done. So, maybe we can get some Democrats to join with him. Because we can't underestimate the damage that Trump can do in the next 2 months in terms of everything, including national security. And you had Trita Parsi on. Who knows what he might pull in regards to Iran. So, I just think we just can't sit back and be passive. Maybe, I think David Sirota was suggesting in The Guardian yesterday that, there should be a big public campaign. Biden should just, start publicly campaigning for him to get Trump to accept the results.
Yeah, well, we're all doing that, and Biden is, campaigning for him to accept the results. We'll see. This is, Trump is setting up his after the presidency scam. And he's a grifter. He's always been a grifter. He's been a grifter for 4 years in the White House. He's going to continue. In fact, all the fundraisers that they're doing now go to a PAC that he controls. I'm speaking at the Bioneers 2020 conference, whose theme is Beyond the Great Unraveling, Weaving the World Anew. It's running December 5th and 6th and 12th and 13th. My keynote is How All Life is Organized Around Democracy. Bioneers from around the world will gather online for world-class keynote presentations, interactive networking, and engaging panel discussions with leaders on the cutting edge of systems change. Our shared work is more important now than ever, and we're inviting you to become part of this change. Tickets are available at Bioneers.org, and there's a 20% discount with the code TOM, T-H-O-M. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 20 minutes past the hour. Pat in Orange, California. Hey, Pat, what's up?
Hey, Tom, you kind of stole my thunder because I wanted to talk to you about that same Daily Kos article that you were just referring to with the last caller. And
about right-wing radio?
About democratizing right-wing radio. So, the idea, he had two issues that he said make it that it's going to be more plausible to do it was, one, the artificial intelligence that has the ability to transcribe hate radio in real time so that they can be evaluated for the lies and the misinformation, and then that information can then be taken to advertisers and said, really, do you want to be associated with these lies and these things that have serious negative consequences to real people, like the idea of denying climate change and the idea of the coronavirus being a hoax, right? So these things have real consequences, and advertisers should know about that and see if they really want to be tied to those things, right? So that was one point. And the other thing is, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, Rush Limbaugh is likely to not be around for a lot longer, or at least certainly not be able to work in the capacity he had. And that all of the people out there on these right-wing hate radio are, they can't hold a candle to what he's done, all right? And so there'll be a big void, right?
Yeah, there will. Limbaugh is a very talented man. He started in radio he's the same age I am. He started in radio the same time I did. We were both teenagers.
I've been listening to. I actually had been listening to him from the '90s, right? And I started listening.
Yeah, I used to listen to him too. I'm with you, Pat. And he is going to leave a hole in the right-wing radio world. And you know, MediaMatters.org used to track right-wing hate radio and report on, you know, outrageous things that were being said. And occasionally I'd use them as a source, or even have people from that organization on. I haven't checked their website in a while. They've been kind of quiescent. But they're, you know, and then there's this newsletter that I get in email every day called The Writing, R-I-G-H-T-I-N-G, The Writing, which, you know, basically gives you a summary of what's going on all the right-wing websites. And Sean has reached out to them about, you know, having the guy who runs that come on the program and just give us kind of, in fact, he's going to be on the show on Tuesday of next week, giving us an overview of what's happening in the right-wing media world. And I don't know that they're monitoring radio. I think they're mostly looking at the web. But AI, this was one of the things in that Daily Kos piece, was that artificial intelligence gives us the ability to more easily take a radio program and instantly transcribe it, and then look for words, you know, keywords and things that might be flags for disinformation and lies and stuff like that. And I know, you know, I had a young woman who's working at George Mason, you know, with the right-wing funded, reach out to me a while ago asking, you know, for access to all our podcasts and asking if we have transcripts, because they were putting together a report on radio. And I'm guessing that they're going to try and figure out something that I said that's wrong, which is fine. I'll own up to, you know, when I screw things up, I'll admit it on the air. And you know, having something like that going on the right would, in my opinion, would be a good thing. Pat, thanks a lot for the call. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I heard you talking earlier this week about Trump voters and how we should respond to them, you know, whether we're willing to forgive and forget. And, you know, I saw these tweets from people like Megyn Kelly and Dan Crenshaw who are like, well, you know, Biden's talking about unity, but they spent 4 years calling us liars and racists. And number one, I thought we were the snowflakes. And number two, you are liars and racists. I mean, I'm sorry. You know, I'm not going to forgive you for supporting a fascistic, immoral, corrupt, racist administration. You know, you shrug your shoulders.
I assume by you, Kevin, you're talking about the Trump voters, not me.
Right. I'm talking about the Trump voters. You know, if you're willing to shrug your shoulders at children being separated from their parents, you're willing to shrug your shoulders at a government sitting on the sidelines while 250,000 people die, I'm not going to forgive you for that. You know, I mean, these people don't believe in democracy. I mean, Kelly McEnany and all these people are running around right now not conceding the election. They don't believe in democracy. And, you know, I'm not going to support that.
I think even, you know, I think that there's something to be said for opening channels of discussion and dialogue, and I think it's going to be a long time before, for example, Jared and Ivanka are welcomed back into society, and particularly in New York. You know, and having dialogue with them in the hopes that they can be salvaged. But we have to be very, very wary. These are people who bought into a fascistic worldview. And who openly have crashed the ideals that this country was founded on, and are continuing to in many cases. So at the very least, we need to be very, very wary of these folks, and just, you know, not give them an inch. Thank you, Kevin. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, got a minute to the break. What's up?
Yeah, listen, Tom, I'm really concerned that in 2022, the group of people who just snuck Biden in, the last time I called, I said I didn't know who was going to win. And I'm worried about repeated 2010, where people did not stick with Obama. And we have
I get it, Robin. I think it's more likely it's going to be like 2018. We actually picked up seats.
Well, I hope so. That's my point.
Yeah, I think so. And also, you're going to have a bunch of vulnerable Republicans running for the Senate. I'm optimistic, actually, about 2 years from now.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour, back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. For today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate. The offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development in infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero. For the Thom Hartmann University. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. For our video this week for supporters of our program, you can find it over at thomhartmann.com. We're talking about endocrine disruptors as modulators of obesity. This is in fact, the title of the article in Cell Endocrinology was Endocrine Disruptors as Obesogens. Why is it that almost a third of Americans are obese? And that's not true of, say, Italians. And it turns out there's actually a single measurable, definable variable. There's a category, or actually several broad categories of chemicals that are found in the American food supply in particular places, and therefore fairly easy to avoid, that actually disrupt our endocrine system, our hormone system, and cause us to crave more food, to eat more food, and also downregulate our metabolism so that we burn less energy so that food gets stored as fat. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Jeannie in Nacogdoches, how do you say that, hey. Jeannie, in Texas?
Hey, Tom. I had an incident happen this morning. My oxygen had to be replaced, and I recently turned 86, and so bear with me. He said, how are you doing today? And I said, well, since when Trump gets out there, I'll really be doing good. And I said, listen, I want to talk to you about something. I said, he was a man of color. And I said, I wish that they would stop saying, Black Lives Matter and so on and so forth. I said, if I could show you how I lived and how I grew up, and I have pictures of the house before I refinished it. And I said, just please think that, and I love you, and I have memories of black friends that I can't see anymore. And when I had Biden was running and I had my signs in front of my house, I'm in a very rural area, I said I would take them in at night and I would place them in the yard where that they couldn't, if they shot, shots wouldn't go through the house, because that's what we're dealing with in Texas. If it isn't guns, it's religion, and I just hate where it's going. I absolutely do, and hopefully we'll have some change soon.
That's the point of your story, Jeannie? Yeah. I think you're right. I actually think that change is happening. I think it's happening all around us, and I think that what we're seeing right now with Donald Trump and with these right-wing so-called militia groups, these basically white supremacist gangs and thugs, is a reaction. You know, this electing a black president is what really kind of triggered these poor, pathetic white supremacist snowflakes, and it's going to be a while. We're going to have to work through this, but it just it's what's so. Jeannie, thank you for the call, and I'm glad you got your oxygen changed out there. Hey, Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Norma, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Do you remember when Ben Carson was making statements about how he didn't need government handouts because they lived in, they took care of themselves, but, they lived in government housing, but he said they did everything and took care of themselves? Do you remember that?
Right. I do.
Okay. Well, he made those comments because they were making changes in the allotment for federal housing money, the money for utilities, the SNAP.
Right, which he is in charge of now.
Yes. And all of that went into that budget in 2018. And I believe, if I am correct, and I'm not crazy, all of that goes into effect in January, along with all of those tax cuts that the Trump people have forgotten about. They didn't read the bills,
You mean the tax increases on people making less than $70,000 a year?
Yeah, all of that goes into effect. Their taxes all go up, and all of these people in Kentucky who voted for Mitch McConnell are about to find out that they've lost their federal housing money, their heating money, their SNAP cards, their WIC programs. All of this stuff that they have depended on is now going to go away. And I don't know how much they have taken out of school lunches. I know that they killed Michelle Obama's Healthy Lunch program. And so next year, when Biden is president, they're going to turn around and yell, see there, Trump was better. And like Ro Khanna was talking about, we need to get this out. And I don't understand why they haven't, because this is one of the things that I teach all the time. This is what they did to you, and this is what you don't know about. And sometimes I get the result of, kill the messenger, and I run. But, it's just... these people have watched Fox to the point where they are brainwashed, and we're going to have to help them. I don't know how, but explain to them this is what happened. It's like that guy that was talking about trying to teach people. And until we can get rid of Fox News, make it illegal here like it is in other countries, we don't have a chance of getting anywhere. Other countries have kicked Fox out. And it needs to be done because
Canada
it's anti-American. Yeah, well, so did England. Yeah. Okay?
Yeah.
So
but Rupert Murdoch has Sky News, doesn't he? Doesn't he own Sky in the UK?
I don't know. But wasn't there an Un-American Act back in the 50s with all of the communist scares and stuff? Did that ever?
Yeah, there were. But it's a very delicate, that's a very dangerous line to even approach, Norma, because when the government gets in the business of deciding what is and isn't acceptable speech, beyond obvious things like, death threats and obscenities. When the government gets in that business and then you get somebody in charge of the government like Donald Trump, really bad things can happen. So, I'm a big advocate of the First Amendment.
Hasn't he been in charge of Fox? Hasn't he essentially owned Fox for 4 years?
Yeah, but my point is that he could, if progressive media was big in the United States, if Free Speech TV was anywhere near as big as Fox, I could imagine Donald Trump going after them if there was a law that allowed the federal government to regulate the content of broadcasting, and or going after SiriusXM's Progress channel, Progress 127. And I don't want to see that happening. But any conversation about banning or getting rid of Fox or any of these other things, I'm very wary of. I think what we need to do is wake people up so that they realize when they're listening to right-wing hate radio or when they're watching Fox News, they're not always getting the entire story. In fact, more often than not, they're not getting the entire story. And it's not that these folks just make stuff up out of whole cloth. I mean, there is some of that, but that's really the minority. Mostly there's 4 or 5 pieces to the story that give you a rounded understanding of what's happening, and they'll pick out one little piece
and say, this is what it's all about. It's like, Kelly Loeffler just rolled out a bunch of ads in Georgia against against Reverend Warnock, the black pastor who she's running against for the United States Senate. And what's she including in that? She's got a little clip of a speech that he gave after a police officer had killed a young black man, in which he said, some of these police seem to have the mentality of thugs. And then she's got a clip from Reverend Wright, the Chicago pastor that was Barack Obama's pastor, that they tried to turn this into a whole kerfuffle when he said, GD America. And that's her ad. It's 15 seconds out of the life of Reverend Wright and 15 seconds out of the entire career of Ralph Warnock. So taking one little piece and blowing just pounding and pounding, and then she's interspersing that with pictures of black people, looting stores and with cities in the background on fire. This is what they do.
It's perception management. And it's propaganda.
Exactly.
But, well, I'm just one person, and I can only talk so much each day, like you know. And so teaching these people that they have been misled is hard. But I don't know if there's anything that can ever be done. And no, I don't want censorship, particularly not of free speech TV. I cannot afford to lose free speech TV, or I'll go insane. But,
me too.
No, I don't know what, we can do, because when you start talking to someone who supported Trump, and my neighbor came over here and cussed me out because I had a Doug Jones sign in my yard and called me a communist because I still had a Bernie sticker on the truck, and that's what I live with. And yet he does not read, he does not understand anything, and yet he comes over here and chewed me out because another neighbor cut a tree down and said, "Why didn't you stop him?" I said, "It's not my business." But this standard white man feels like he can yell at me for anything. But you cannot talk to these Trump people. And it is going to be a big problem, and it's going to be crawling our way up the hill, pushing a snowball. But it's got to be done.
The good news, Norma, is the whole issue of momentum. While Trump was president and Trump had power, he had momentum. Now that he is widely believed not to be president, and certainly after January 20th, when he's no longer president, that momentum is going to vanish, and it's starting to vanish. And in fact, it's showing up in opinion polls right now that people who thought they were Republicans or were Trump supporters just 2 weeks ago are now saying they're having second thoughts. So, I'm encouraged by that. But keep the faith, Norma, and keep up the great work teaching people. Thank you so much for the call. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Exposing the con in conservative, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Excuse me. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Lowell, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to talk about Proposition 22, which is the anti-worker bill in California that just passed, and the disturbing number of Democrats
the gig economy,
that worked on that campaign.
Bill. Okay, go for it.
Yeah, and they that rule permanently classified the workers as independent contractors, so the companies never have to pay sick leave or health benefits or anything.
Workman's comp,
or workers' comp or anything. And, like, for example, Anthony Fox was Obama's transportation secretary, and he worked on that campaign. And then, like, Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, Tony West, also worked on the campaign. And, LaFonza Butler, who was the campaign strategist, was the lawyer for Uber to deal with organized labor. So it's like, we need to really start addressing this anti-worker phenomenon in the Democratic Party as well.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And calling it out.
And we have to acknowledge, Lowell, that, if you wave a couple $100,000 in front of somebody, it's awful hard for a lot of people to say, no, I'm going to go with, my values rather than your money. I think it was Will Rogers, maybe somebody else, but back in the day, talked about how, how a paycheck can have priority over principles. And I'm guessing that's what you're seeing there, although there are some of these folks who really actually believe that a government run by, or nation run by, big corporations and billionaires is the best way to go because, hey, the magic of the marketplace and the intelligence of the marketplace, and there's a million decisions made a second in the marketplace, so the marketplace should be what decides all things. It's a very seductive ideology that the right-wing think tanks have been promoting since the 70s. So, by the way, CNN and MSNBC just called Georgia for Joe Biden. So the news gets better by the minute. But Lowell, have any of those folks, I don't, it's going to be interesting to see if those folks are continue to be considered acceptable in Democratic circles. Although, like I said, there is this battle in the Democratic Party. Do you think any of them have experienced any blowback or pushback?
I seriously doubt it. I mean, if you listen to like that Abigail Spanberger thing, she said anyone who says the word socialist or anything, because she's a former CIA person, they have a training against any worker movements or any progressive things. That's their entire mantra.
Multimillionaire Donnie Deutsch was saying the same thing this morning on Twitter, and I tweeted at him, sorry, it's not Democrats who are calling themselves socialists. It's Republicans who are calling Democrats socialist, and we don't have to use the label ourselves because they called Barack Obama a socialist. I mean, that's a word that comes out of the mouths of Republicans, not Democrats. It's an epithet, but, yeah. So anyway, Lowell, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It is a problem. And it's why I'm encouraged when I see the Democratic Party moving in a more progressive direction. I think that's going to be the essential thing to help this party solidify its position in the United States, or re-solidify. We need to go back to the values of the New Deal and the Great Society. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. So we need to be thinking right now about how to Trump-proof the presidency in the future. I mean, Donald Trump is causing all kinds of chaos and disasters, and things are, frankly, I think, going to get much worse before they get better. And I don't think they're going to get better until after January 21st or January, noon on January 20th. And that's assuming that, absolute craziness doesn't happen. But, there's a bunch of steps that we need to take, from recalibrating or fixing how we do our elections, to fixing how we handle money in politics, to fixing the pardon power of the presidency, to specifically saying that if a president is found to be a criminal, he or she can still be held to account. I mean, just straightforward stuff. And we need to be getting ready to do this. I lay it all out in a new video for people who support our program that you can find over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Mike in Columbus, New Mexico. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Thank you, Tom. You helped me win the argument of masks for my Republican friends that don't wear masks. I thank you for giving me the information.
Tell me about it.
Well, you did something very strange one day, and you wore a mask on your program because of the smoke from the forest fires. And it reminded me a mask that was developed over 50 years ago by the federal government and certified and used by hundreds of thousands of people around the world. It's called a smoke mask. And it's a different principle. It's a wet mask. And it's so easy to demonstrate that if you blow smoke through a surgical mask, you can see the smoke. And if you blow smoke through a wet mask, a smoke mask, no smoke. And it shows.
Right, and you can see the color change actually on the mask if it's a white mask. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the significance of that is that the conversation is generally they don't believe that masks are effective. And when you can show that there's a dramatic mask and promote the idea that there's a possibility of a mask that could be very, very effective, we all know that if we all wore a very effective N95 mask 24 hours a day, it would dramatically reduce the coronavirus. But the smoke mask is a very lightweight, mass-produced, very inexpensive mask that works in a very dramatic way in that it is sticky. And so when the smoke goes through it, it sticks to the fibers. And the reason it sticks to the fibers of the smoke mask and not a surgical mask is because smoke is covered with tars and creosote, which repels water. And
right. So how did this help you convince your friend to wear a mask to avoid COVID?
Because it gets into the conversation of the importance of a mask. They're convinced that masks, because of Trump's propaganda, are not effective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you can promote the idea that a better mask could do the job and we could all wear a mask, then it gets over the top. And you've given me the facts and the figures of masks and the good science, that coupled with the idea of an example of the possibility of a mask that would be highly effective. And so, you see, it's really something very simple. I know the formula of the smoke mask, and you can look at it.
I got it, Mike. In fact, we've gone over that. Congratulations, Mike. That is great news, and thank you for sharing that with me, and I'm glad I was helpful. McDaniel in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, McDaniel, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. So I'm pretty new to politics. Just started for a couple of years now. I am glad that Biden's president, but my only thing is after he takes care of this COVID situation that's going on, which is something that I assume is very important, I wanted to know if he will be looking into revitalizing communities that are have a cycle of poverty, putting money into these communities and having community centers where these kids learn how to do trades and, be productive in society instead of just straight crime and violence. Because I live in an area where it's just nothing but gun violence.
Yeah. This is something that we need to be addressing as a nation, McDaniel. We really do. And when people have good jobs that pay well, which is why we need to bring back unions, by the way, and it's why we need to bring manufacturing back to the United States. When people have good jobs, then a lot of these social problems, in fact, a whole spectrum of social problems, from drug use and teenage pregnancies all the way up to gun violence, all diminish radically. And so, back in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt passed a law called the Buy America Act, which required to buy things manufactured in the United States. It has a provision that the president, in the case of an emergency, can authorize a waiver. And Reagan started just handing these waivers out like candy. And every administration since him has done that, so that, government offices, the government is one of the largest purchasers, it's 20% of the entire GDP is government spending. It's a huge purchaser of things. So if we were to start enforcing that Buy America law again, which is still on the books, it would force thousands of factories to relocate back into the United States and do it without tariffs, and and create demand. And those factories could revitalize a lot of these communities. I really think that's one of the keys. We've tried it a whole variety of different ways, but you touched on one of the most important issues of our time, Dan. Thank you so much for the call and for making that point. I really appreciate it. And thank you for being with us this week. A special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer, Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick White, Geraldine Halbert, Dave Fulton, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, and Jabbermocky for working on our program. And to you for listening or watching or whatever you may be doing. Thank you so much. Or listening to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.